Hello guys and welcome back to the SimpliCode programming channel. This is Vikesh and let's get started with today's topic, which is about using JDBC in Java to connect to the databases. In this example, I'm using the open source community edition PostgreSQL, but you can use any database vendor provider if you want to. If you want to use Oracle or MySQL, feel free to do that. But in this demo, I'm going to use Postgres. So you can download the Postgres Windows installer. Since I'm using a Windows machine here, you can download the installer from the official postgresql.org website. And you can also download the JDBC driver for PostgreSQL going to this particular official website, which is jdbc.postgresql.org. Similarly, you will be able to find the JDBC driver for all other database vendor providers as well. Once you download this is going to download a jar for you, and you can store the jar anywhere. Like I've put this jar into this particular location. You can see this latest JDBC driver jar for PostgreSQL. So for every database vendor, there would be a different JDBC jar which you need to download. So that's that. You install the PostgreSQL, you set up its database, and when you install the PostgreSQL, you also get a nice SQL client to talk to the database, because database has a server and database has a client, right? So to deal with that, you install the server, and all these database vendors like Postgres, Oracle, Microsoft SQL, etc., they also provide a nice thin client with it. Postgres also provides a client. When you install the Postgres server, it will also ask you, or it will actually automatically install the SQL client for it as well, which is called pgadmin. So this is how the pgadmin client looks like. The current edition of it is pgadmin 4. So you will get that installed automatically. And once your Postgres server has been successfully installed, if you just go to search and type pgadmin, you will get this option. Once you click on this option, a new browser window will be opened and you will see this client here. You will not see this particular window. Let me close this one, but you will see something like this. You will see a server here. So you can go inside it. You will see a PostgreSQL edition here. And if you go inside it, you will see a database here. If you open the database, you will see the Postgres database by default created. So you can just right click on this and create a database here. You can name it as whatever you want. You can leave everything as is for now and hit save. Another thing which you need to do when you do the installation is it will ask you to set a database user and password. So choose whatever database username and password you are comfortable with, and you will be using that username and password in your program as well. So create your database here and just leave the database at this particular point. And now we will try to connect to this particular database. In the example which I prepared, I'm going to connect to this test database. So let's go to the JDBC demo and see what is happening there. So for this purpose, I've created a class called JDBC demo. It has a public static void main method, and there's a lot going on here. So let's take it step by step, and I will be keep shuffling between the database SQL client and this particular class to build a nice narrative. So if you think carefully, what you need to have if you want to connect to a database, the obvious answer is the address of the database. Where is that database? You need to know the location of the database to connect to it. So that is called the connection URL. Every database vendor will provide its own connection URL, and you can find that connection URL from the official documentation. There are tons of examples available for it as well, but always refer to the official documentation for that particular database provider. The general syntax is JDBC : your database vendor's name, / the host name. This can be any IP address or your local host. Generally, we also put a port here, something like this. 5432 is the port on which the PostgreSQL server runs. But again, you can put the port here on which your database server is running. Every database vendor has their own default port. The PostgreSQL server has the default port as 5432. So you provide the host name, you provide the port, and then you provide the database name. You provide the database name to connect to. So if you remember, I told you that I have written the program to connect to this particular database called test. So whatever that be, you provide that name here. And this is going to form the connection URL. I can remove this for now, but this is how the connection string is going to look like. And it is going to, it follows the same format for any database vendor that you say JDBC colon, you write the database vendor name, and then you say colon double slash, you provide the host port, and then you provide the database name. So that is your connection URL. After that, to connect your Java program to a database, you need to use the java.sql.connection class. This is very critical class and very important, and probably the single most important class which you need to have in your program if you want to connect to a database. So you say connection con equal to null. I'm just creating a null reference to it. And before we go any further, let me also tell you why we need this JDBC and what is actually this JDBC. So Java is a programming language. It does not come with its own database, but there are multiple other vendors like PostgreSQL, MySQL, Microsoft SQL, Oracle, etc. So Java wanted to provide a uniform way to connect to all of these databases. Because imagine all of these databases building their own API contract. It would have been a nightmare for the developers to connect to different databases or shift from one database to other database. And that's the reason Java created this nice interface called JDBC. And it said, whoever wants to connect to Java should follow this JDBC specification and provide their implementation, similar to the interface and concrete class thing. It's not exactly that, but you can think of it in that manner that JDBC provides an interface with the method declarations. And then Oracle, PostgreSQL, MySQL, all these database vendors are supposed to implement that interface and provide their own implementation. But JDBC APIs will always remain the same. Whoever wants to connect to Java has to create a driver, and that driver contains that implementation. And that's the reason we downloaded that JDBC driver. And I will come to how do we include that, but that's the background of JDBC. And that's why you need JDBC to build that uniform contract, and your vendor will provide their own jar, which will have the implementation of the JDBC interface. And in this program, what I'm trying to do is basically, I'm trying to insert a record into a table. So what is a table and how do you create that? So let's go back here. So in this test database, you will see a schema. By default, you will see a public schema, and you can create a new schema if you want to, or you can just use the public schema. So inside the public schema, you will go under and you will see an entry for tables. So you just right click and you say create table. You can also write in complete SQL statement, but I'm just showing you how to do that in pgadmin. And you can give the table name, you can give the column information, and that's how you create the table. So I have created a table here, which is called student. And the student table has 3 columns: roll number, name, and age. If I show you the exact query or the whole create TDL for it, it looks like this. So I created the student table in the public schema, which has a roll number field or roll number column, which is of type numeric. It has a name column, which is a varchar or a character varying, and it has a age column, which is again a numeric. So roll number, name, and age. These are the 3 different columns which I created inside the student table. So I have a student table with these 3 columns. So that's that. Now let's go back to the program. So I have the student table, and now I want to insert some records in the student table. So let me just change the values here so that we can see a different entry. So I have just hard coded some values. Generally, you will be getting these values from somewhere in the program. But for simplicity, let's say you have got those values. Once you have got those values, the next thing you need to do is to build the SQL statement, the exact SQL statement which is going to be run on the PostgreSQL server. So you write that statement. In this case, I'm showing you a creation example. So it is going to be an insert query. So I say insert into table name, which is student, and then I provide all the column names. It is always a better practice to provide the column names in these brackets. Even if you're inserting the values to all the columns, still provide the column names. So I say insert into table column values, and then you provide the actual values as the roll number variable, which I created here, the name variable, and the age variable values. So I just supply the values here. Remember, when you are inserting the values, roll number and age are integer, so you don't need to put any single inverted commas for it. But name is a string variable, so I've put this single inverted commas. It's a simple string concatenation, nothing fancy here. So I'm just writing a plain SQL statement here and storing that into a string. Once I've done that, the next piece which I need to do is to get a connection to the database. And the way you are going to get a connection is by this uniform method. No matter which database provider you are using, you are always going to use the driver manager.getConnection method to get a connection to the database. And how do you get the connection? You supply the connection URL, you supply the username to connect to the database, and you supply the password. In this case, I've just set the username and password as Postgres and Postgres. So Postgres is the username and Postgres is the password. Pretty lame, I accept, but this is just for demonstration purpose, so it's fine. But generally, you will be getting these values from some application property file. So these are the three parameters which you need to supply to this get connection method, and then you will get a live connection to the database. This is the line which is going to make it all happen to connect to your database server. So if this line gets executed successfully, you have a live connection. Once you have a live connection, the next thing which you're going to do is to create a statement object on the connection. Statement is, it can be anything. It can be an insert statement or a select statement or an update statement or a delete statement. Everything is a statement there, right? So that's why you need to create a statement object. So you create a statement object and then you execute the SQL. This insert SQL which you prepared, you're going to execute the SQL here saying st.executeUpdate. Execute update is the method which is used for any insertion or deletion operations. So that's the method you're going to use and supplying the SQL query which you built with the actual values of roll number, name, and age. The execute update method returns the number of rows affected once this statement got run on the database server or the SQL query got run on the database server. It might impact one rows if it's an insertion. It might impact multiple rows if it was an update query, right? So it is going to return the number of rows affected, and that is what we are going to use to check if my insertion successfully went or my insertion failed. So if this execute update is going to return 1, which means that my row got inserted successfully in the database. So I'm just printing this out here. And if this particular M returns 0, which means none of the rows were affected by my SQL query, which means my insertion operation failed. So I'm just printing a sys out here. And then I'm just putting this in a catch block here to print any error and finally closing the connection. This is again very, very important. Database connection is one of the costliest connections you will be creating when you will be writing your Java applications. Always and always make sure to close these database connections. Otherwise, your application is going to face serious database bottlenecks. So we close the connection. So that's all we are doing here. We prepare the URL. We just create a placeholder for connection object. We prepare our SQL query with all the relevant values. We get a connection to the database. We get a create statement. We get a statement object from the create statement method, and then we execute the statement. And then we can validate the statement execution if there is a way to validate it. Once you've done all of that, you close the connection. So let's run this program and see if we can see this new record inside the student table. And before we do that, let's also validate what is present in the student table as of now. So if I go here and I say view all rows, this is just going to run a select star on the student table. So currently student table has one record with roll number 1, name as John, and age as 20. And now I'm trying to insert another row with roll number 2, name as Jane, and age as 22. So if I right click and run as Java application, I get this entry which says inserted successfully, which is coming from here. Inserted successfully, and it also prints the exact SQL so that you can see what SQL actually got executed on the database server. This is the same string SQL which I built. So this is the SQL which got run on the server, which said insert into student values, and the roll number was 2, and the name was Jane with single inverted commas because this was a string, and then age was 22. This was the exact SQL which got executed. So my SQL has been executed, my connection has been closed. If I go back to the pgadmin client and if I try to rerun this query, now I get 2 records. So if you remember, this record was already there, but now I get this second entry, which is the new entry which just got inserted because I ran the program, and you see the roll number 2, the name as Jane, and the age as 22. So this was a very simple example to show you how you can do the JDBC connection. But one of the things which I still haven't covered is the usage of the JDBC driver, the jar which I talked about. So the way you are going to add the jar is you go to the project, you right click on the project, you go to the build path, go to the configure build path, and there you will see different tabs, source, projects, libraries. So go to the libraries tab and select the class path here, and you can choose the add external jars option. Click on this, load your SQL JDBC jar for your particular database vendor. For my case, it was PostgreSQL. Let me just quickly remove this jar and show you right from how it's done. So this is how it will look like for you. You select the class path, you click on add external jars, you go to the location where you have downloaded your JDBC driver jar for your particular database, select that, click open, it will come here, hit apply and close. That's how the jar is going to be there. If you don't provide the jar, your program is going to fail miserably. It is not going to work. So make sure that you have the jar, and then only it is going to be able to create a successful connection and be able to successfully execute the query. Remember, JDBC provides the specifications, and then the particular database vendor like PostgreSQL provides their JDBC driver, which has the implementation for that JDBC API. And that the Java has this uniform JDBC API, and every database vendor is expected to honor and implement that API only, so that Java developers can work on the JDBC contract and everything should work as is. So this is all I want to cover in this particular session. And in the next session, we are going to have a look at generics in Java. If you like this video, a thumbs up would be massively appreciated. And please don't forget to subscribe to SimpliCode for more programming related videos. Thank you, and we'll meet again in the next session.